Daniel stood at the edge of the grand hall, unsure why he had been called inside. The air smelled of incense and warm candle wax, and the soft glow of torches shimmered across the high stone walls. Every detail of the palace looked untouchable, carved from marble and gold. The silence of the nobles in the chamber made him uneasy. He was only a simple man who worked with his hands, someone who repaired machines and tools in the far side of the city. To be standing in the presence of royalty was something he had never imagined for himself. At the center of the hall sat Princess Eleanor, her silver gown reflecting the light like flowing water. Upon her shoulders rested armor that had been passed down for generations, a suit that symbolized the strength of her family and the safety of her people. But tonight that strength had faltered. Fracture had appeared across one of the plates of her gear, a wound in the very symbol of her rule. When the damage was discovered, panic had spread among the court. The armor was more than protection, it was tradition, and without it, many whispered that the kingdom itself could fall into fear. The royal craftsmen had studied the break, but none dared to touch it. They claimed the steel was too sacred, too complex, forged by hands long gone, and methods long forgotten. The court had fallen silent until Daniel, standing among the servants, had spoken. He had not planned to, but when he saw the despair in Eleanor's eyes, the words had left his mouth before he could stop them. He had said he could fix it. Now the princess looked at him with calm but searching eyes. The nobles murmured in disbelief, their voices sharp with scorn. How could a common man succeed where masters had failed? Yet Eleanor raised her hand and the room fell quiet. With grace and steady command, she allowed Daniel to step forward. His heart pounded as he approached. He bowed respectfully, then turned his eyes to the broken armor. The crack was sharp, running like a scar across the shining plate. He knew he could repair it, but he also knew that failure here meant disgrace. It's not only for himself, but perhaps for his family as well. Still, he had always believed that steel was not impossible to understand. Every flaw, every fracture had a reason, and every reason could be solved with patience and care. The princess studied him as he examined the piece. She did not speak, but her gaze was heavy, as though weighing his soul rather than his skill. Daniel felt it, yet he pushed away the fear and focused on the work before him. He asked for tools, and though the nobles scoffed, servants brought him what he needed. He placed the armor upon a stand beneath the torchlight. With slow movements he traced the break, feeling the edges with his fingers. Sparks danced as he worked, small bursts of fire that lit the chamber in brief flashes. Each strike of his tool echoed through the hall, loud and steady, like a heartbeat. The nobles watched in silence, some shaking their heads, others leaning forward with curiosity they could not hide. Eleanor's eyes never left him. In the flickering light, her face softened, as though she saw something in him that the others could not. Daniel worked without pause, shaping, mending, and sealing the fracture, until at last the plate shone whole again. The surface gleamed brighter than before, the scar hidden within the flow of steel, as though it had never existed. When he stepped back, the hall remained silent. Daniel held his breath, waiting for judgment. Then Eleanor rose from her seat. She lifted the restored armor, turned it in her hands, and for the first time in many days, a faint smile touched her lips. She placed it against her chest, and the piece fit perfectly, strong and true. The silence of the court broke into a wave of whispers. Some called it luck, others murmured that perhaps the young man had been guided by unseen hands. But Eleanor raised her voice above them all. She did not give praise openly, nor did she question his skill. Instead, she only gave him a single look, one filled with meaning, one that told him this moment was only the beginning. Daniel bowed again, his chest tight with relief and wonder. He had come to the palace as nothing more than a repairer of broken things, but he felt that tonight he had mended more than steel. Something unseen had shifted between him and the princess, something that neither words nor silence could yet define. Daniel left the great hall that night with his heart still racing. He walked through the quiet corridors of the palace, the sound of his footsteps mixing with the echo of voices still lingering in his memory. He could still hear the whispers of the nobles who had doubted him, their disbelief at seeing a simple man repair what they called untouchable. But stronger than those whispers was the memory of the princess's eyes, calm and steady as they watched him work. That memory followed him like a light in the darkness. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to return to his ordinary life. He worked at his small shop on the edge of the city, repairing broken tools, bending iron, and fixing whatever people brought to him. Yet people no longer looked at him the same way. Word had spread quickly through the city that he had touched the armor of the princess and restored it when no one else could. Children pointed at him with wide eyes. Merchants greeted him with respect they had never shown before, and even guards nodded as he passed. For Daniel, it was strange and uncomfortable. He had never asked for attention, and he did not crave the weight of it. One evening, as the sun sank behind the high towers of the palace, a carriage stopped at his shop. The royal crest shone on its side, and soldiers in polished armor stepped down. They told him the princess wished to see him. Daniel felt his breath catch. He wiped his hands on his apron, uncertain if he should go, but the guards gave him no choice. Soon he was carried once again to the palace gates. The halls glowed with golden light as he entered. This time there was no gathering of nobles, no crowd of doubters. Instead, the princess herself waited in a smaller chamber, one lined with shelves of books and lit by tall windows where the last of the sunlight streamed in. She was dressed not in her shining armor, but in a simple gown of deep blue, her crown resting lightly on her hair. She looked less like the ruler of the kingdom and more like a woman who had been waiting for someone she trusted. Daniel bowed low, unsure how to address her in such a private place. She told him to rise and come closer. Her voice was soft yet carried the same strength he had seen in her eyes. She thanked him again for what he had done, though her words held more weight than the polite thanks spoken in the hall before the court. She told him that when he restored the broken gear, he had not only repaired a piece of armor, but had given her back her sense of safety. For that, she would never forget him. Daniel did not know how to answer. He had only done what he believed he could do. But hearing the gratitude in her voice made him feel as if he had been part of something far greater. He explained to her that he had always seen broken things not as hopeless, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. He believed that even the hardest metal had a story, and by listening closely he could understand it. The princess listened with great interest, her eyes fixed on him, as though she was hearing truths she had never considered. They spoke for a long time. The princess asked him about his life outside the palace, about the people he helped, about the nights he spent at his forge. Daniel told her of the quiet streets, of the families who depended on his skill, the satisfaction he felt when something thought useless could live again. She seemed fascinated, as though his world was as strange to her as the palace was to him. When their time ended, she surprised him by placing the restored armor back upon her shoulders. She moved her arms with ease, testing it, and smiled faintly at how well it fit. Then she looked at him with a seriousness that made his heart tighten. She told him she wanted him to remain close to the palace, for she believed his skill might be needed again. Though she did not explain why, her tone left no room for refusal. Daniel agreed, though part of him feared what such closeness to power might bring. As he left the chamber that night, the torches flickered softly along the walls, and he felt the weight of a new path forming before him. He had stepped into the palace as a repairer of steel, but now he was becoming something else. Ash. The princess had seen more in him than skill. She had seen a spirit that even he had never recognized. And as the night air touched his face, Daniel understood that his life would never return to what it once was. Daniel stayed near the palace as the princess had asked. At first he lived in a small room at the edge of the gardens, where the air smelled of roses and the sound of fountains filled the nights. He continued to work with his hands, repairing small pieces of armor, fixing broken tools for the guards, and adjusting the gears of the great gates that protected the palace. The work was not so different from his life in the city, but the place and the people around him were very different. Every guard he passed saluted him, every servant bowed, and every noble watched him with sharp, questioning eyes. The nobles did not trust him. They whispered in corners that he was too close to the princess, that he did not belong among the rich and the powerful. Some claimed he must be using tricks to earn her favor. Others said he was dangerous, for if the princess placed too much faith in a common man, it might upset the order of the kingdom. Daniel heard these whispers, but tried to ignore them. He had no desire to cause unrest. All he wished was to be useful. The princess, however, did not share their doubts. She often called for Daniel in the evenings, not for repairs, but for conversation. They would walk together in the gardens under the light of the moon, the paths glowing silver. as the water from the fountains shimmered. She asked him about his thoughts, his dreams, and his hopes. At first, Daniel was shy, speaking little, but as time passed, he began to open his heart. He told her how he had grown up in the poorer part of the city, where every broken tool meant hunger for a family, and how he had learned to repair anything so that no one would go without. The princess listened closely, her eyes warm with understanding. She spoke of her own life, the weight of wearing the crown, and the loneliness of being surrounded by people who served her, but never truly knew her. With Daniel, she felt different. He did not fear her rank, nor did he worship it. He simply spoke to her as one person speaks to another, and in that she found comfort. One night, as they stood near the great fountain at the center of the garden, she asked him why he had stepped forward in the hall that first night. Daniel looked at her, the moonlight shining on her face, and admitted that he did not know. He said it felt as if something inside him could not stay silent when he saw her in need. It was not courage, he explained, only the simple belief that he could help. The princess smiled, and for a moment she looked less like a ruler and more like a friend.
Ow.
But peace in the palace was never certain. Shadows stirred at the borders of the kingdom. Reports arrived that a rival land was gathering soldiers, preparing for an attack. The council argued endlessly, but the princess listened quietly. She knew that if war came, her people would need more than tradition. They would need strength that adapted and endured. And when she thought of who understood such strength, she thought of Daniel. One evening she brought him into her private chamber, where her restored armor gleamed beside the fire. She asked him if he could do more than repair. She wanted him to make the armor stronger than ever before, not only for her, but for her guards as well. She wanted shields that could resist more than swords, weapons that could endure long battles, and gates that would never fail. Daniel hesitated. He was only one man, and such work would be greater than anything he had attempted. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw trust, and he could not refuse. For many days and nights, Daniel worked. His hands grew weary, his eyes heavy, but his spirit burned bright. Sparks lit the dark chambers where he labored, and the sound of hammer against steel became the rhythm of his life. The princess visited often, bringing him food and speaking to him gently when his strength faltered. Together they tested each piece, and with each success their bond grew deeper. The nobles grew uneasy. They saw the way the princess looked at Daniel, the way she smiled in his presence. They began to fear not only his skill, but also the place he was earning in her heart. Rumors spread through the palace that perhaps the common man was more than a craftsman, that perhaps the princess was beginning to see him as something greater. Daniel did not know of these whispers, or perhaps he chose not to hear them. All he knew was that every time the princess placed her hand on the armor he had shaped, her smile made the endless hours worthwhile. Something unspoken hung between them, something that neither dared to name. But both knew it was there, waiting, like a flame, kept alive in secret. The days grew darker as news of the rival kingdom reached the palace. Scouts reported that soldiers were moving closer, building camps and sharpening their weapons for war. Fear began to spread through the city, and even the nobles who once mocked Daniel now demanded stronger defenses. The princess remained calm, but she knew the danger was real. Her people depended on her, and she could not allow her kingdom to fall. Daniel worked without rest. He reforged armor, strengthened shields, and designed new weapons that were lighter and sharper than anything the guards had used before. His hands were rough and scarred from long hours at the forge, but he never stopped. He believed that if he gave his strength now, he could save lives later. The princess often came to see him, her presence giving him hope when his body grew tired. She told him that his work was not only building weapons, but also giving courage to the people, who now whispered of the craftsmen who stood beside their ruler. When the first attack came, it struck the city gates. Rival soldiers charged with fury, their blades flashing under the night sky. The guards fought bravely, and Daniel's reinforced gates held strong. The enemy could not break through, and the kingdom's soldiers pushed them back. The people cheered, but Daniel knew the battle was far from over. The rival kingdom would return with greater force. The princess called a council of war. Nobles argued in loud voices, some demanding retreat to the mountains, others insisting on striking first.
How?
Through it all, the princess listened in silence.
Gates.
When the shouting faded, She turned to Daniel and asked what he thought. The hall grew quiet, shocked that a common man would be asked to speak among lords. Daniel stood, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. He said that the kingdom must not run, for fear would only grow stronger. Explained that they could hold their walls if they worked together, and that courage and unity would break the enemy more than steel. Some nobles scoffed, but the princess nodded. She declared that Daniel's plan would be followed. Her decision caused unrest among the court, but no one dared to defy her openly. Daniel felt the weight of many eyes upon him, some filled with anger, others with doubt. Yet when he looked at the princess, her gaze told him that he was not alone. The next battle came at dawn. The rival army marched with banners high and drums echoing across the fields. The princess herself rode to the walls, her armor gleaming with the repairs Daniel had made. Daniel stood beside the soldiers, his hands stained with soot, but his spirit unbroken. He watched as the enemy charged, and he prayed that his work would hold. The clash was fierce. Arrows filled the sky, swords rang against shields, and cries of battle shook the earth. The enemy struck again and again, but Daniel's gates refused to fall. The soldiers of the kingdom, inspired by the sight of their princess leading them, fought with a strength they had never known. Daniel moved among them, carrying tools, repairing breaks, and giving courage with his steady presence. Though he was not a warrior, his heart beat with the same fire as those who carried blades. Hours passed before the rival army began to falter. Their strength broke against the walls, and at last they turned back, leaving the fields covered in silence and smoke. The kingdom had held. The people cheered from the towers, shouting the name of their princess and the craftsmen who had stood beside her. That night the palace glowed with celebration, but beneath the joy lay exhaustion and fear of what was still to come. Daniel sat in the quiet of the forge, his hands trembling from the long days of work and the chaos of battle. He wondered how a man like him had come to stand at the center of war, and whether he could continue to bear the burden. The princess came to him then, her armor still shining with the marks of battle. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder and told him that he had saved not only her, but the entire kingdom. Daniel looked into her eyes and saw no distance between ruler and servant, only two hearts bound by shared struggle. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps his place was no longer outside the palace gates. Perhaps fate had brought him here for a reason far greater than he had ever imagined. The morning after the great battle, the city was quiet. Smoke still rose from the fields and broken weapons lay scattered near the gates. But the banners of the kingdom still waved proudly in the wind. People moved through the streets with tired steps, yet their faces glowed with relief. They had survived. Their walls had not fallen, and their princess still stood strong. Daniel walked among the people, helping where he could. He repaired carts that had been damaged. He lifted heavy beams from fallen homes, and he spoke kind words to those who grieved. Though his body was weak from endless labor, his heart urged him forward. Everywhere he went, people thanked him, calling him the man who had helped save them. Some even bowed to him, something he never thought he would see in his life. Daniel did not seek such honor, but he felt humbled by it. The princess watched from the palace balcony. She saw the way her people looked at him, and she saw the way Daniel gave all of himself without asking for anything in return. In her heart she knew he was different from any man she had met. Nobles carried titles, soldiers carried blades, but Daniel carried courage that shone from his spirit. She knew her kingdom needed him, and she knew she needed him too. That evening the palace opened its doors for a gathering. Nobles and guards filled the great hall, the air alive with voices and the sound of music. It was not only a celebration of victory, but a promise to remain strong for the days ahead. At the center stood the princess, her gown flowing like silver light, her crown glowing beneath the torches. She lifted her hand and the hall fell silent. She spoke with calm and steady words. She told her people that they had faced darkness together and had risen brighter than ever. She praised the bravery of the soldiers, the loyalty of the guards, and the strength of every family who had endured. But then her voice softened, and she spoke of one man whose name had become a whisper of hope in every corner of the city. She called Daniel to step forward. Daniel's chest tightened as the eyes of the hall turned toward him. He walked slowly, each step echoing against the stone floor. He bowed before her, but she reached out her hand and told him to rise. She looked at him, and in that look, the weight of her choice was clear. Before the entire court, she declared that Daniel was not only the man who had restored her armor, not only the craftsman who had stood by her side in battle, but also the one she would name as her consort. The word rang through the hall like a bell, carrying shock and wonder to every ear. Nobles gasped, whispers rushed like fire across the chamber, and guards stood straighter, unsure of what they had just heard. Daniel froze, the meaning of her words striking him harder than any hammer. He had never dreamed of such a moment, never thought a man of his standing could be spoken of in such a way. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw no doubt, only warmth and certainty. She was not speaking as a ruler bound by duty, but as a woman who had made her choice. Slowly, Daniel bowed once more, but this time not as a servant, bowed as a partner. The hall erupted in voices, some filled with joy, others with confusion, yet none could change what had been spoken. The princess had given her word, and in her word lay the law of the land. That night the city celebrated with music, fire, and laughter. Children danced in the streets, soldiers lifted their cups, and bells rang from the towers. Daniel stood beside the princess on the balcony, the two of them looking over the city together. For the first time he felt not like an outsider, but like someone who belonged to something greater than himself. The princess turned to him, her smile soft and real. She told him that from the moment he repaired her broken gear, she had seen in him a spirit that could not be hidden. She said that where others saw only steel, he saw life, and where others saw hopelessness, he saw a way forward. She had called him consort not as a reward, but as a truth her heart could no longer keep silent. Daniel said little. 4 words could not capture what filled his heart. He only looked into her eyes and knew that the path he had once thought simple had led him to this moment. Together they stood as the stars glowed above and the city shone below, 2 souls bound, not by rank or fortune, but by trust, courage, and the fire of something far greater than both.